Coming up, a change application for a compost manufacturing facility to be enclosed at Swanbank became the big issue for councillors at this month's Growth, Infrastructure and Waste Committee. Councillors had to grapple with options and decide on the best one. It's Friday, August 11, 2023, and I'm Alan Roebuck. Welcome to Ipswich Today, which acknowledges the traditional custodians of the land on which it is produced and pays respects to elders past, present and emerging. This podcast is supported by Kinetics, people-powered web hosting trusted by Australian businesses since 1999. From the August round of committees, this month's Growth, Infrastructure and Waste Committee discussed the application for an enclosed compost facility and odour issues more broadly for over an hour and questioned council officers extensively. The application seeks to alter an existing approval to remove the approved landfill operations on part of the site at Swanbank and instead construct an enclosed compost manufacturing facility along with associated waste processing and treatment areas. So, strap yourself in for this one. It does go on a bit, but will be of particular interest to you if you experience odours in your suburb. In what was a meeting laced with many technical answers, Mayor Teresa Harding put a series of questions to Council's Development Planning Manager, Anthony Bowles.
How many submissions did Council receive for this compost facility, and have they addressed Council's concerns raised in previous submissions?
Council received 3 submissions on this application. So the content of the submissions related to matters that you'd probably expect from a compost manufacturing, so things like odour. There were also concerns about impact on the road network, impact on other compost manufacturing facilities, and compliance with the TLPI were probably the main issues. And stormwater, management of stormwater. So those issues have been managed or addressed through the assessment of the application, and the sections of the report will deal with them. But I suppose as a starting point, the odour is probably the main reason people would make a submission or be concerned about the proposal. As you'd be familiar with in our efforts for achieving compliance in this space, odour is largely managed through the Environmental Authority with assistance from DES, or DES is the one who manages that aspect of the proposal. However, it is something that we're conscious of and we are involved in because there are codependencies, I suppose, in achieving compliance for these sorts of uses. So, however, there are conditions on the proposal and a compliance regime that DES will carry out. But the main way that odour is dealt with, the primary way that odour is dealt with this use is through enclosing the use. And carrying out the composting in an enclosed building, which is consistent with what the TLPI requires. So enclosed composting is supported, whereas open composting isn't supported. And that is the main method of dealing with that issue, and is the reason why DES is satisfied that there won't be, to put it their way, is to be designed to avoid and mitigate environmental harm. So that's how the odour will be dealt with, primarily by enclosing the use. As for traffic, there will be some road upgrades to the frontage of the use that are appropriate for the volume of traffic generated. The submissions related to a section of the road where this use won't be accessing or won't be impacting upon. The existing Remondis use does use a portion of that road, but we aren't able to make conditions that aren't related to this particular change. However, we have applied conditions as best we can to address those issues with the road frontage, so there will be a small section that will be upgraded. Stormwater will be managed on site with appropriately designed detention facilities. It's actually a bit unique. It is one of the few uses that can actually reuse that sort of water that is generated on the site as part of the composting process. A lot of stormwater detention facilities or bioretention basins are just a discharge-only system. Some of this water can be reused, which is good. So there are appropriately qualified designs for the retention of stormwater that addresses that issue. And finally, stormwater. That's probably they're the main issues that have been raised. Oh, the final one relates to the impact or financial impacts on other composting uses. Which is not really something that council is able to consider when talking about a commercial competition arrangement. What we're looking for is assessing the impacts of the land use. And there are some occasions where Need is something we're looking at, but not particularly in this case. It isn't one of the assessment benchmarks.
Okay, thank you, Mr Wells. I'm glad you've raised odours because our community has been putting up with odours from non-compliant waste companies for many years. And we've talked about it being in case, but how can we be absolutely sure that this facility won't emit offensive odours? What is in place?
Yep. So look, that's a fair question. A lot of the issue with the odours in this locality, and you can sort of see the odour heat maps in the reports, a lot of the issues are coming from existing outdoor composting manufacturing facilities, which over time we hope to see transition to enclosed facilities similar to this one. Really, the only way to actually remove these odours from these other lawful uses is for them to transition to an enclosed facility. One of the reasons why it is difficult for that transition to occur is the cost and the availability of feedstock and things like that. Council will be increasing its contribution to green waste through the FOGO program that we're adopting, which is something that, in a way, is quite helpful for getting other green waste operations to be able to adapt and change to this style of processing. So really, the only way to reduce the overall odours in the area is to have more of the facilities enclosed. So this proposal is one of those facilities that will be enclosed, and most of the odours contained and filtered through a biofilter system to reduce the odours that are generated from that activity. It isn't going to reduce the odours from another facility, unfortunately. It will also still have some odour. So the finished stock, the pasteurised material, does emit some odour. But compared to an open window, it's a fraction of that. It's about maybe 1/7 of the odour. Most of the odour is emitted during the composting process where a lot of liquid waste is added. That is the part that happens outside at some operations, and that is the main contribution to odour. That isn't happening here. Okay. We're fortunate in that this isn't the first enclosed facility that this council has been able to assess an application on. So you might recall the WMI application, which the council approved a little while ago. Very similar. There are some differences in that had a biofuel component, which was able to use some other extracted resources. What we should expect in the future as there is a transition to these enclosed facilities is a reduction in odour. This is really the way to achieve that because we aren't reducing the waste quick enough to eliminate the need for this type of facility.
Okay. And does council have any legal reason to not approve this application?
It would be difficult. So the council is able to make a decision not to approve it. That would be subject likely to an appeal afterwards. The type of application isn't a new use. We're adding a use, but we're changing the existing approval. So there's an existing approval for a landfill on this spot, in the area that they are proposing the use. I think it could be argued that this type of use will have fewer impacts than a landfill use. It speeds up the remediation of the section of land where the site is located. So it would be difficult to argue that there are creating new and negative impacts when we're potentially reducing them through the introduction of this use. Not that that is the only test. When we're carrying out an assessment of another change application, we're assessing it, the new component essentially like a new application in that it goes through the same process and it goes through public notification as well. But it's in the context of what is changed from the existing approval being a landfill. So it's not in isolation, it's within the planning scheme and in consideration of the existing land use, which makes it difficult to create an argument that we should be refusing or recommending a refusal on the proposal.
Noting with, I know it's a different site, but Cleanaway and Cell 3B and obviously the groundwater level changed, the retention by a retention basis on this, how does that interact with groundwater and what's in place for that?
What the function of the basin is to collect any sort of concentrated flows of water that are normally collected on a hard stand, or if where there's a scenario where there is no buildings there, it just falls on the ground and eventually flows through the natural channels and valleys and things like that and pools. So there are already some pools on the site which retain water. There's one near the road, but this is a new basin in a location where it is collected and channelized and then directed to a lawful point of discharge.
I'm asking, how do we make sure this is not another cell 3B?
Yeah, okay. Well, I suppose the main thing is we're not digging into the ground and accessing or making contact with the groundwater table. The stormwater basin is its main purpose is to restrict the amount of flows leaving the site so that it isn't a scenario where it's worse than it was if there was no development. So it concentrates it, but it releases it at a slower rate. It doesn't interact with the groundwater directly like digging into the ground would do. Okay. It is a basin, but in terms of depth, it's nothing compared to a landfill cell. It doesn't have that sort of lining system or anything like that. Its purpose is to capture and slow down the pace of the water leaving the site, but it still goes to a lawful point of discharge.
Councillor Paul Tully had these questions for Anthony Bowles.
It talks about screened compost being stored outside for at least 6 weeks. Now, I assume that comment within our report, the officer's report, might also relate to one of the objectors that raises the issue of the outdoor area where there'd be odour impacts. So what's the validity of that aspect of the objection? If I'm reading this correctly, you've got the outdoor area, an objector saying that has the potential for odour impacts, despite the enclosed nature of the general operation. Are you able to comment on that, please?
Yes. So the finished material still does have an odour. It is just significantly lower than the odour emitted from the processing component. So it is valid to say that the outdoor component will emit odour. It emits odour, though, at a much lower rate and not a rate that brings it above the already background odour from that area, which is admittedly high because of the existing uses. But it's about 1/7 of the odour of an open window, for example. So it's much lower, and it's really to compare it to something you might be familiar with. It is close to finished product. It has been pasteurised. So if you were to put it in your garden, it would be similar to that sort of odour in a way. It would be, but obviously it's a much larger amount. But look, it does have odour, but compared to a window, it's significantly less.
Just finally, on page 26, it talks about the process having the entire process, I assume, minimum external impacts, and elsewhere in the report it talks about nil or limited odour discharge. Could you just comment on whether that just refers to that outdoor area or the entire process that we're using the word minimum or limited odour discharge? Is there a risk in relation to that because of our uncertainty or the general uncertainty of the nature of the operation and whether or not odours can be successfully contained? There's really two areas where the odour could come from. So the one that would be the major generator, I suppose, would be the outdoor storage area, which we talked about a minute ago. But the worst odours are contained within the facility, which is under negative pressure. So it isn't blowing out doors, for example. The air is getting sucked in when doors are open. So the doors are sealed for the vehicles before they enter, and they come in and they close again. There's negative pressure while the door is open, keeping the air in. After that, it is going through a biofilter process, and there's quite a large biofilter on this site where the air is collected and pumped through. If it isn't reused in the site, it is emitted through the biofilter, which is a process where the biological processes essentially scrub the odour from the air and allows it to be emitted at a rate which has much lower odour. So I think there's a combination of sources of odour. So the extracted air would be quite low because of the biofilter, and the storage area. So there's no denying that there will be some odour. However, the amount of odour is significantly less than essentially the background odour. So there's already odour in that area because of the existing land uses. If you were to lower the other background odour, this would be contained to a level which would be acceptable
under the under DES's requirements. So normally the requirement is 2.5 odour units at a sensitive receptor. So the source of the odour, the compost, the stored area is 0.7 odour units. So it's emitting 0.7 when the acceptable limit for a sensitive receptor is 2.5. So the problem is all those other sensitive receptors are already above 2.5 because other uses are around. So when in the future, when all those uses are reducing the amount of odour, this particular use will only be contributing from the outdoor area 0.7 odour units to that, which is less than the 2.5. And that's at the source.
A final question from Councillor Marnie Doyle.
Final question from me, Mr Bowles. Just so I'm clear, if we don't approve this change, the original DA stands and so that can be landfill.
Yes,
is that right?
That's right. In fact, part of the site can still be used as landfill under the current approval. So this cordons off a section.
Yeah.
It becomes a site that is partially remediated. They might be suitable for other uses in the future. So, for example, the anaerobic sort of digestion we talked about before. It may be an encouragement for the operator to consider using the site and remediating the site for higher and better industrial uses, but it is capable of being used for landfill, and particularly, and more so if the recommendation isn't approved.
Yeah.
With discussion completed, councillors in attendance voted to approve this application under delegation, apart from Paul Tully, who voted against. Councillor Nicole Johnnick did not take part in the discussion or the vote. For further reading and to view the complete discussion, go to Ipswich City Council's website and the YouTube channel where you can watch the meeting on demand. The same committee meeting unanimously voted to recommend Council approve a site at 831 Redbank Plains Road as the preferred location for a new refuse and recycling centre and a new animal management facility. As detailed in the report, this site has many things going for it, including the land is council-owned, it meets a large parcel size needed for the two uses, the available spaces will allow for a co-located tip shop and shared visitor car parking, separation of traffic flows for waste, recycling and animal management visitors, allocation of space for disaster waste storage or other council fleet, internal spaces to create queuing and to remove flow issues, and it can be designed with future growth and expansion over time. Again, you can read the full report online. Check out the show notes for those handy links to Ipswich City Council's meetings and agendas, and Council's YouTube channel where you can watch all meetings live or on demand. Ipswich Today is supported by Kinetics, people-powered web hosting trusted by Australian businesses since 1999. This podcast is listener supported. Please make a once-only gift or regular donation to help keep it online. Just go to ipswichtoday.com.au. Follow and stream this podcast from your favourite app, including iHeartRadio, or play Ipswich Today on smart speakers. Music is supplied by Purple Planet Music. This is Alan Roebuck. Thank you for listening.